My name is Chloe Dawson, and a warm welcome to our panelists and all of the new and familiar friends in the chat. This discussion focuses on the ways that we can and really must evolve and adapt our relationships with stakeholders. Stakeholders are critical to both bringing action to our insights and activating and advocating for our practices more broadly. So, we've gathered a group of amazing panelists who are thinking about this relationship with stakeholders in some really cool and unique ways. So, I'll toss it over to our panelists for a short introduction to themselves and to share what motivated you when you were thinking about the desire to shift your relationship with stakeholders. So, Bo, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chloe. So, hey, everyone. I'm Bo. I'm a senior researcher working at Miro, where I lead strategic research to shape how Miro serve the most important use cases around collaboration. And actually, one of the use cases is actually about how people use Miro for UX research and collaborate with their stakeholders. So, if any of you in the call has feature request or pinpoint, please I'll send that my way. And speaking of, what motivated me to join this panel discussion? Well, first of all, to me, it's very natural to, invest in stakeholder relationship building because most of us spend the majority of our time in the work, and it's even longer than the time that we spend out with our families, our friends, or our pets. So why not just, cherish the time that we spend with the people who we are working together with and build meaningful connections with each other. And as for the unique challenge that I was experiencing in terms of stakeholder relationship and management was about how to level up the research maturity with the teams who are not familiar with UX research. Um, so our culture is very customer centric, of course, and we have we already got a seat at the table, and research is considered a very important element in the predictable life cycle. But at the same time, a lot of people that we are collaborating with, they haven't worked with the researchers in the past, and they don't know how to, involve us in their product development process or collaborate with us. So today I would like to, discuss with these amazing researchers in our panel and to share our stories and bounce of ideas.
Thanks, Bo. We can't wait. Amanda, what about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Amanda Gelb. I'm a staff researcher at Lyft, and this week is actually my 4-week Lyftiverse. 4-year Lyftiversary. So in that time, I've gotten to research riders, drivers, bike share, just a host of different things. Right now, I'm focusing on mapping, which is really fun because maps are always inaccurate representations of what is happening in the real world. But what motivated me to get into more stakeholder, you know, involvement is in the past prior to Lyft, I had experienced that soul sucking experience of, the research is pointing in one direction with a neon blinking light and the executive goes in the total opposite direction. Or I had a, partner of research misrepresent the research that we had done in meetings, those kinds of really unfortunate circumstances. And when I got to Lyft, I was the first researcher in New York in the office, and they were, a number of folks in the office who all first didn't know that they had demand, and then once I built demand, had a lot of demand, and so I really, leaned on my partners to conduct research with me in order to scale myself in that first year there.
Hmm. Wow, thanks, Amanda. Joyce, what about for yourself?
Sure. I'm Joyce. I'm based in the Bay Area. I'm a researcher at Atlassian. I've been there for about a little over 3 years, so I worked on kind of various aspects of the business, but right now I'm focused on Trello. In terms of shifting my relationship with stakeholders, I think part of this, had to do with adapting to COVID naturally. So, kind of combating Zoom fatigue and all the kind of blurred work-life boundaries that came up as a result of that. So, Atlassian is where I work, and obviously we have people spread across time zones. So, kind of having limited attention from people was another aspect. And I think part of it is also kind of personal, though. So, wanting to just kind of level up my career. So, previously I had worked in communications and, had this creative visual practice on the side as well. So, thinking about how to fold in those skills and those elements of my identity kind of into my work as well.
I love that, Joyce. We're so happy to have you. Beth, what about for yourself?
Hi, I'm back. Thanks, Chloe. I'm a user researcher also at Atlassian. I've been there for just on 3 years this week. And in my time, I've been working on at various different Jira's, versions of Jira's, our flagship product. And I was really motivated to start investigating how I could shift how I engage with stakeholders. Yeah, I mean, as Joyce said, we've always been a distributed team. We've always been around the world, but remote working really stepped that up. And I'm a bit of a nerd for operational efficiency. So the initial spark for me was noticing that I could do things better and that I was doing repetitive work. I was repeating my efforts in different places. But at that time, we also had really low research coverage in my area, and I needed to hop around between teams. So I was thinking about what can I do to make sure that those insights live on and grow and flourish when I'm not keeping an eye on what the team's doing. How can I deputize them to be effective custodians of that insight in my absence? So that really drove me to experiment further.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Beck. So that you can all kind of see there's so many really cool perspectives, it sounds like, that has really motivated each of you to really shift into really thinking about your relationships with stakeholders. So I'm curious, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. So what did or does the stakeholder shift look like for you and your team now? So let's see, Bo, would you like to start us off again?
Yeah, so I've definitely observed a lot of changes and a lot of
Mm,
level up in research maturity. For example, in the past, maybe people they say research is like magic wand.
mm,
It's like when they assume that if they have done like 1 or 2 research studies and their product will become user friendly right away, and of course they will get disappointed later, and or they see research as like a one-time thing, and they use that to test their ideas and see whether that work out or test a feature. And but I think now with a lot of effort that we've put in, we've seen people really changing their mindset about UX research. They say it's a learning process, it's a continuous process. It's not like you do one thing and you're good. Um, so I think it's like a continuous effort and a lot of practice we have done. It's really hard to condense that with a few sentences, but I want to share like 3 tips that I find most effective in that process. So the first one is to understand and our stakeholders, and also build some relationship with them, because as researchers we are the expert in understanding users' needs, and most of us we also have this noble mission to serve these needs with excellent user experience. But for our stakeholders, they are also our users, and they are the user of our research findings. So it's equally important to understand their needs, goals, and expectations, and pinpoint as well. And also, build connections and making ourselves considered as part of the team, and to have the trust from them. And following that, the second tip I want to share is to win our credit and shape ourselves as the expert whose opinion, whose advice they should follow. Because yeah, and how to achieve that? I would say my rule of thumb is always start from something small. For example, like usability project, or for example, like insight sprint to help team identify the low-hanging fruits. And so they can see the value of UX research, and then you can promote a success and scale it up to something bigger. And that is more effective than starting a UX revolution, at the very beginning, because people are most people, they are, afraid of uncertainty and big changes. The last but not least is to have a strong opinion of yourself. Of course, UX researchers, we are influencers, and we are not a decision maker, not always decision maker for product decisions. But it does not mean that we cannot be prescriptive or being assertive about, in our research recommendations, in advice that we are giving to our teams. I remember when I was academia researcher, so most of the wordings that we were using was like, it's possible, or it might be, and could be, a lot of these kind of words, because we want to stay neutral and we want to show that we're unbiased, and also we want to open up the space with other researchers. But when you're working in the industry, if you're in-house, and your audience is different, they are not researchers, they are your stakeholders, and they are
yes.
waiting for your expectation. They are expecting you to show them which direction that they should go.
Mhm.
So you are, yeah, so you are, because you are the expert, you are doing the research, and you are speaking for the user. So it's very important that you also give them a clear message for which direction that they would go.
Yeah, I love that, Bo. Just some really great call out there. And I love the 3-point kind of way that you've outlined that for all of us to kind of think through some actual real skills and ways that we can approach this. Thank you. Amanda, what about for yourself?
Sure. I love what Bo said about being the expert and positioning yourself as an expert. That's something I've
Yes.
definitely leaned into more as I, in parallel, have created more opportunities for my partners to be involved in research. And so, again, in the early days when I was at Lyft in New York and we were all in the office, the first thing I did was, set up a bunch of lunch and learns, speak at town halls, kind of put myself out there, but more as an advocate for research. I feel like no matter what role I've been in or company I've been at, we always need to be educating and evangelizing for what research is and what it stands for. And part of that is also, I found like most of my partners think that research is the interviews, like conducting those conversations, whereas research is, setting up the right question, coming up with the hypotheses, determining what the recruiting looks like, then conducting the interviews after you've come up with a thoughtful discussion guide or set of activities or whatever it is, methodology. Then there's analysis, then there's synthesis, then there's a report, and then next steps. And so just being really clear on all of those different elements being equally research. And then for me, shifting my thoughts on how stakeholders get involved is thinking about how I can include at least some other folks in each of those different elements. So one thing that we did at Lyft is created a rapid research program, which is a way that gets our partners in front of our users themselves, interviewing them. And I'm the coach. I've set up templates for them. It's all very structured, but it kind of forces them to take the wheel and sit in front of our users and hear their perspectives firsthand. And that, I would say, I'm just blown away by the impact that that has over me going off and, pulling like the perfect video or quote or whatever it is, like having someone experience that firsthand. I think that can happen, for your partners if you're interviewing, if they're doing the interviewing, or if they're listening in and they're, note taking or debriefing with you afterwards, or rewatching a video that you recorded of a conversation. There are a number of different ways into that. But just thinking more about so much of our time that we spend on the end product. And I've kind of taken a step back and thinking about how I shift towards thinking about the people that are involved in building that end product. Like, I think you said this, but like, I'm moving on, sadly. Like, I've never been in any role in my 15-year career in which I've been able to like stay with one team building one specific part of a feature for months on end. And so it's really incumbent on who goes through the research with me that they take those insights forward, that they are championing, our users and what we learned, not just on my behalf, but on everyone's behalf to make that better product. So I put a lot more of my time and effort into that partner piece for sure.
Yeah, such a great call out, Amanda, on that intentionality, right? And setting up the space and that experience, right? I love that you isolated that. Oftentimes people think of it's just the questions, but it's actually everything that's happening around those questions that come into play. And I also love your call out about empowering others, right? To also take ownership over the process so that they too, like you mentioned, can be champions and move this forward when you cannot. Thank you so much for that. Zach, what about yourself? I see you smiling there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so incredibly important to empower our stakeholders in the research process. Because again, we can't be everywhere at once. They're the ones who are going to be building the thing. And so they need to be really engaged and really champions, as you say, Amanda, for the insights. So I totally agree with that. I am more focused actually on the closer to the end of the research cycle in terms of where I'm experimenting. I'm really inspired by a flipped learning approach where you give out reading ahead of time and then use your synchronous time for discussion, and also by remote best practices, because as we know, making this panel happen, sync time is really precious. And I want to make the absolute most of it when I've got all my stakeholders in a room. And I really believe that if I can make that time a time for discussion and collaboration and questioning and pulling at threads and poking at holes and things like that, that time will be best spent in embedding those insights really firmly and really learning them deeply, rather than passively watching a share back or engaging in that way. And my hope with that is that as my stakeholders go forward, they become at least part or whole owners of that insight, and it becomes something that they can advocate for really confidently. So that's my aim.
I love that. Joyce, what about for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Amanda said about kind of constantly having to evangelize. I think I've been lucky, and a lot of the teams that I work with are pretty directly engaged. And so a lot of the thinking that I've been doing is more about kind of expanding your sphere of influence. And because I think we're always trying to kind of build up that research empire and get that visibility throughout the organization. So um, kind of like Beck, we're often thinking about how to be more proactive in terms of the engagement that we get. So really combating that Zoom fatigue, like I was mentioning before. So focusing on active engagement over passive consumption. So I think one thing that I worked on for a bit, or one kind of strategy, was around watch parties. So people say, for instance, like if they can't come to a particular session to observe, or for leadership, for instance, they might want like a kind of roll up, and so that's a way to kind of curate this experience and really lower the barrier to entry, so you don't have to worry about no shows, or like maybe a bad recruit. So you're kind of curating the content for quality and making sure it's really impactful, and it's also kind of like this collective viewing experience. I think another approach is around thinking about like trivia. Specifically testing around insights. So I think that's an interesting way to get people to kind of directly challenge their assumptions, and also kind of boost their memory. I think, like Beck, we think about pedagogy and like how do we make insights stick. There's lots of different flavors that you can try. You can do kind of anonymous approach. So there's different tools you can use where people get to participate and don't have to put their name on the line. You can also, if you feel comfortable or you have a different team culture, have people put in their names and they can win prizes, right? So there's lots of different ways to kind of make research a bit more engaging for stakeholders.
I love that, Joyce, and I also love your call out to how we're even reinforcing some of those engagement markers for ourselves. Like you said, you could have it anonymous, it has its pros and cons, or you could add a name and have some type of a reward to provide to them at the end of the day. But I love also your call out to pivoting, right? So understanding that not everyone can make everything or be available in that moment, but how are you creating kind of access, right? Or some spaces for them to be able to engage so that you are able to get their feedback. So I love that call out. And so how would you all say your stakeholders have changed throughout this process? So I'm actually going to start with Beck because I see you smiling again. And so I feel like you have something to share right off the top of your head.
Yeah.
So let's start there.
So true. I had a real win the other day, so it's top of mind for me. I really loved seeing my stakeholders forget that I created an insight. That moment of forgetting has been really gratifying for me. And watching them become the advocates in a room, coming to a meeting but staying quiet, and hearing them become the advocate for that particular finding or a particular insight, piece of data, has been really exciting. The other day, I had one of my senior leaders quote back some research to me quite disapprovingly, like we have to make sure that when we ship this, it meets this particular standard. And that was one of my findings from 18 months ago. And I said, yes, that is very important. So inside I was doing a little dance, but on the outside I was very business professional.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course. Amanda, what about for yourself?
Yeah. The actual people who are showing up, like the numbers of people who are becoming more engaged. So I focused on everyone initially, and now like the newbies, whoever joins Lyft, I'm like, ooh, like you're fresh meat. Like you don't know about research, you have your own like join me on this journey as I tell you what research is like here, and like being able to change their perspective. Then they're with me, they're with research like forever for the most part. I think Joyce mentioned this also, that like when someone experiences research, they're just on board for a while. And so I really focus on, kind of new people now that many folks know who I am, and then seeing those numbers, your note-taking signups fill up, the people who want to observe, also question fidelity. So thinking about how to evolve the types of questions that we're asking, and are people going to want this in the future, is like not something that we know most folks are able to answer for themselves. So just again, that education piece about what makes good questions, and working on that together, and then seeing that investment really pay off in our research kickoffs in the ways that we come together. So just being better partners to research. So understanding that we do have a lot of demand, and that, we're trying to do the best that we can and scale across all of the requests. And, on my end, that's really communicating what the trade-offs are. We could research this, but we might have to wait for a month on that, or whatever it is, because our timelines can be a little slower, even if we're, moving fast and whatnot. And then hearing that, kind of like Beck was saying, echoed back to me of like, okay, I know you're doing this research right now. So like, would you consider this? Or let's engage in what that means. Just having those conversations with that level of respect for each other and for our disciplines is also just incredibly heartwarming. It makes me feel like I have true partners in this.
Yes, I love that. And that's such a wonderful thing to experience, right? When you really feel like you have partners in the work that you're doing. And again, kind of coming back to what you mentioned before, how you set yourself up for success in that really matters, right? That's what we're talking about today. But what about for yourself? I saw you nodding a lot as Amanda was speaking. What was on your mind?
Yeah, sure. Because I kept smiling, when Amanda and Rebecca shared their stories, because I see they really, engage their stakeholder in the research process. Everyone was, so excited about research, and you really observe these changes. And for me, it's also the same. And because initially some people, maybe they feel, okay, only researchers should do research, just like when only engineers do the coding. But now research is actually become a team sport. I think that's really wonderful. And also another thing I want to share is one of the beauty of research is, it's really helped the team to build a vision that every single team member they share, and they feel intrinsically that they want to make that happen because they was part of the research. They've seen the insights, and they've identified the business opportunity and the user needs. So they want to build it, and they know why. So no leadership tell them you have to do it or you have to do that. They want to do that themselves, even the engineers. And I have a story that I want to share, and it's just happened recently. So one of the team that I'm working together with, so this summer they went through some chaos. There are some changes, top-down changes, for their priority, and they had to shift their folks from one area to another. So at the beginning, they were very lost and very frustrated, of course. But after, I took them along the research process, from like mixed method research study from beginning to the end, they gradually fell in love with this topic because they discover a lot of opportunities. They go, oh, this is such a nice area that we have a lot of things we can work on here. And also thanks to the amazing work that my team has done. And now actually this topic has become one of the most important area in our company. So I'm very proud of them. At the same time, that's also the magic that research can create for our teams.
Yes, I love that call out, and also the invitation that you're extending, right? So we know we're in love with what we do, but when you can help someone else fall in love with what you do, like it just hits differently.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much, Bo. And what about for you, Joyce? How has this kind of shown up in your wheelhouse?
Yeah, I think it's a fun question because it's just like all of the wins.
Yes.
So, I mean, some of these I can't really claim credit for. It's more of like kind of successes I've observed on our research team more broadly. But I think one great example is just growth in demand for headcount. So obviously it varies per company, but we've seen kind of teams flip engineer or designer headcount into researcher headcount. Just because they acknowledge kind of the necessity of research on a team, which is always very gratifying. Or, it shows that the existing researcher that they worked with produced really great work and cultivated more of that demand from them. I think Amanda talked about presenting at town halls earlier, but just generally getting asked to present recurring kind of insights at these like monthly meetings that might happen. So there's like always a spot reserved for you. I think really is gratifying as well, kind of showing that they desire to hear your point of view and really it's expensive. It could be hundreds of people and 10 minutes of their time. That's a lot of money. So that I think to me indicates kind of value in our perspectives. I think one much more kind of concrete, specific example to me was like one of the first things I worked on at Atlassian was like a secondary research review. And part of the way I wanted to socialize it was as comics. And I was like, how do I make this go viral? So it's like I have to I have to make comics. I thought about different things like, oh, maybe it should be World Cup related because the World Cup was happening. But that's kind of what I had settled on. And I think maybe 6 months later, one of the heads of design was like, we need to print these out as posters and put them all over the place. So that was, similar to kind of the other stories of when work you do kind of gets usurped in a positive way, and there's a real sense of transference of ownership to stakeholders. I think that's really great.
Yeah, I love that call out, Joyce. I think you're also speaking to like markers of success, right? Like you had mentioned, right? That like invitation to that meeting, that's your spot going forward, even if it's 5 minutes, right? That's a marker of success. That's something to celebrate, right? People reaching out and saying, I love what you did here. Can we use this? Can we integrate this somewhere? Like that is just such great call outs to ways that we can also be aware of ourselves around markers of when we're doing the work and it's being really picked up and adopted into other people's processes and ways of working. So that's amazing. So in retrospect for the group, knowing what you know now, if you could do anything differently, what would it be? So I'm going to start off with Amanda.
Yeah, I would say definitely spending, let's say 5% more of my time on the branding, marketing, PR side of things, thinking about my role and curating a Slack post that's going out to people, or, being emboldened to share that, not just with the 6 people that were following me in the particular project, but maybe an entire org, or maybe, a bunch of different groups who are interested in that set of insights. Thinking about like fun music before workshops, running more workshops, like bringing my partners into the process sooner, turning the spotlight on them, thinking about, doing research kickoffs, interestingly, the music, as well. And then also just being a partner to leadership. So again, like I spoke earlier about like the different stages of a traditional research project, but we as researchers are also amazing moderators. And so thinking about being seen as leaders that bring people together has gotten me in a lot of rooms I wouldn't have otherwise with, senior folks, because I was the one that was coming up with the activities for people to do, or, moderating a conversation, or, thinking about the breakout group questions or that kind of stuff. So also just thinking about our roles a little more expansively.
Such a great call out. But what about for yourself?
For me, thinking back, I don't think I will do anything differently, but there's one thing that I would like to share with everyone. So which is about set of boundaries and make sure that we are working on the most strategic things in our work. Because just thinking about what we discussed today, sorry, there's some join the discussion. So just thinking about what we just discussed today, there are actually a lot on our plate as UX researchers, because conducting great research itself is not enough. We need to do advertising, promoting ourselves, promoting research, making our insights, digestible, and make it creative to share it to them, building connections, and sometimes maybe also a little politics, So so what I really want to say is like, thinking about like many companies, they have the impression that if they hire UX people and their product will become become user-friendly right away. And maybe that's one of the reasons a lot of UX practitioners are struggling with the roles. So what I really want to say is learn to take care of yourself and be clear with yourself about what is you are willing to do and what is just too much. And remember, it's okay to fail for some time, and then you'll learn from your mistakes and you move to the next one.
So I love the way you set that up. Again, just kind of dropping some gems for us, right? Some great food for thought as we're all thinking about our work and what we're doing next. It's such a great call out. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Beck, what about for yourself?
Yeah, I have such a similar perspective as you, Amanda. So I was smiling thinking about that. Looking back, when I first started experimenting with this approach, I was really focused on getting my information across. And that was effective, but I don't think I was thinking big enough or ambitious enough. And recently I had an opportunity because I had been moderating workshops in my area for so long. My product leader asked me to moderate a prioritization workshop, and I was able to bring that together so that my research findings discussion session became a part of that prioritization workshop. So we were really front loading with those findings and staying really user focused. And that supercharged my impact on the roadmap in a really material way, much more so than anything else I've done. Mm-hmm. So I think one, yes, absolutely lean into your natural skill set. It might seem a little left of field, but if I can make impact with what I'm doing, then that feels like my job. And if I'm happy to do it, I'm going to do it. So I make a lot of time for that kind of strategic work now, probably 20% of my time even. Mm-hmm. And the other one is to think big and be ambitious and not be swayed by prior experiences you've had with stakeholders. Just go big and place yourself in the seat and see what happens.
Yeah, that's such a great call out. Back about just, I think earlier in the conference, we were talking about bravery, right? And Becky just mentioned, just go big, go for it. So I absolutely love that. Joyce, what about for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning, for instance, like if you find that things aren't going very well, it's easy to get upset about that. But I heard a phrase, I think it was Shona, someone on our team, who said, "Get curious, not furious." So I'm really kind of thinking about like, why are things not going well, for instance, to kind of help you ideate as to new ideas. I think I'm actually anti-efficiency to counter Beck's earlier thought, but I think it is really important to carve out time for yourself to experiment. So it can be quite tempting to like templatize everything and do everything the same way every time. But in some ways, I think that is not always going to be effective just because you need that novelty factor to keep drawing people in. Like something could work the first time, but like not land the second or third time because you're doing the same thing over and over again. So I think it's really important to carve out that time for yourself. And, it's just helpful for a sense of like personal meaning as well, in terms of as you think about your career and not wanting to get burned out and continuing to be inspired. Like that's something that's really important to me. So I think, you really want to keep things fresh and ideate, but you need time to do that. So you really need to give yourself the room to do that. And in that way, I think that research in many ways can be more creative than design. Just like slightly hot take, but
yeah,
I think it's really important if you think about the longevity of your career, just personally beyond kind of your interactions within a team and the longevity of insights.
That's something that Joyce has actually inspired me to do more, is to be more creative in my practice and to think of ways that I can embed that creativity into what I'm doing. So it's definitely an impact she's having on us as researchers in the team as well.
I love that call out, Beck, of just even kind of mirroring in this moment, right? That Joyce is someone who really embodies this, right? And you can even feel it on your side of the team, and that's amazing to hear. So as we kind of are coming to a close of our session, I know, unfortunate, I can simultaneously hear all of the like sighs in the room as we're closing out this session. I wanted to just talk a little bit around tactical tips. So you've already dropped some amazing gems throughout our discussion, but what tactical tips or tools would you say has best served you in your journey to enhancing stakeholder engagement? So let's start off with Bo.
Well, you're asking me, and then I would say Miro. What else could that be? Well, now just because I'm working at Miro, but also it's we use Miro. So alongside of my research process, I use Miro to collaborate with my stakeholders, starting from research intake, and then we use Miro to embed different documents like our research plan and motion guide, etc. So you have everything in the same place. It's not an advertisement. I'm just sharing my experience. And also have the few notes. So I think it's great that you have everything in the same place, and also you can use that to collaborate with your stakeholders and bring them along the way. And actually, I create a Miro template for research project management and stakeholder collaboration. So I can share that later, and so feel free to check it out. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. Amanda, what for yourself?
Yeah. A kind of more philosophical one, I suppose, is to conduct stakeholder interviews ourselves. And so I think there was a talk earlier on turning the lens inwards, or folks that do just internal research, but just thinking about giving our core partners the microphone. And as a researcher, you're able to ask questions that you wouldn't be able to ask if you were just in a one-on-one or a meeting with them, because it's more of an official capacity. But any kind of like super juicy or potentially controversial thing that we think about taking on, I'll like pause the team and say, wait, let me just get like a few people's different takes. And then we can iron out a lot of kinks earlier on that way that would have come up had we not had these conversations or had that data about our internal folks earlier. The second is to just be super clear on how much time you are asking of your stakeholders and what you are going to be using their contribution for. So if they are taking notes, for example, I will say, thank you for taking notes. I'll email this. I'll, say it verbally. Thanks for taking notes. I will be reviewing all of the notes to create my final report. And then the sneaky education piece that I was talking about, like, and by the way, like, make sure you're writing observations, not just like your ideas based on what someone said, and here's what that looks like. Templates are also really huge. So creating, if it's notes, creating a note-taking template, like having people, I think the Crew book was about like, Don't Make Me Think, or one of the famous researchers' books was about that. And so applying that to our stakeholders as well, like how can I make your life as easy as possible so you can just step into this interview or the analysis that I'm asking you to do. And I've created 2 slides for you to fill out. And it's really clear, you need to watch this 10-minute video and fill out these 2 slides, and you've contributed. Yeah, I've done collaborative lit reviews. I've been experimenting with that. So sending out an article and then saying, hey, can you summarize it here, and like, here's the one-liner TLDR, and here's the, the summary paragraph or whatever it is. So just thinking about those different hooks in and making it as easy as possible to contribute.
I love that, Amanda. Beck, what about for yourself?
Yeah, I think maybe also philosophically, I think a lot about taking the situation as it is and practicing radical acceptance. It is a tactical tool. It doesn't sound like it, but I think often we can get bogged down in our frustration about how things should be. Like, I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to work this hard. They should be listening to research. It's the right thing to do. And I think honoring that feeling, but then taking the next step, which is, okay, well, this is the situation I'm in. What am I going to do about it with what is available to me? And sometimes that means working harder, but it gets you where you need to be in your impact.
Yeah. And Joyce, what about for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe one thing to take away is you can do a lot of things in a lot of different tools. So for instance, like the insights trivia thing I mentioned, like you can use a specialized tool like Mentimeter or Kahoot if you want to be fancy, but you can also use Google Forms, or you can use Keynote or Google Slides. So there's like many ways to, what is it? Peel an onion, something like that. Loom is also like a popular tool that we use quite widely at Atlassian for kind of async sharebacks. But yeah, I mean, I think kind of relating to that idea of carving out space, like actually try to use lots of different tools. Like you can oftentimes really MacGyver them to do lots of things that you want them to do. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, on behalf of myself and the panelists, just want to say thank you all for tuning in today. And if you have any questions, you know where to find us. But stay tuned for more.